Hi everyone, back after about a week of not tossing one of these videos up, so a little bit overdue. As you can see, I got a dress shirt on today, got some meetings. That first meeting is in less than 2 hours, so I'm gonna jump right into this. This is either my 5th or 6th video. I'm going to talk about a period that is largely considered to be in the 90s, around what was dubbed at the time the Alt.Country movement. This period, some say it dates back to the 80s, 70s, some say 60s. Certainly the influences do, but the real explosion of this scene, which I was I was there to witness throughout New York, up and down the East Coast, and at South by Southwest every year. I was at South by Southwest from '99 to 2005, which is when a lot of the sort of bands splintered and became a variety of different acts from all over the country and all over the world sort of adopted this sound that I absolutely loved. And first I'll sort of draw on some of the influences that were always mentioned around this sound, then I'll jump into who sort of spearheaded it, and then some of my favorite records that came out of that period. So when you think of the alt-country music, some called it Americana, there was a magazine called No Depression, so there's a lot of references to that. There was a magazine called Corn-Fed that I think was out of Brooklyn, that I subscribed to at the time. So there was also a list server called Postcard from Hell, which is a reference from an Uncle Tupelo song that I was on from right around when email started, until maybe the mid-2000s. A friend of mine, Dave Dewey, runs it. It's a fantastic newsletter where people contribute their album reviews and show reviews. It's brought a lot of people together. I've made a lot of friends via Postcard, and it's a wonderful place. So I believe it's still around, and if it is, it's probably worth checking out. But the influences, so prior to, again, saying where or who started it, which I'm sure you have a pretty good idea, I've covered them a few times in prior videos. The sound was sort of a mix, or a lot of the acts that were around during this time, the overall sound was a mix of country, folk, singer-songwriter, punk, straight ahead rock and roll. There's the sounds of the Beatles and the Stones in there. But these are sort of a few records that I've often heard cited by the bands that were around during that period. So to start is The Clash's London Calling. One of my favorite records, I think without much debate, one of the greatest rock and roll records ever put out. Came out in 1979. Every song on this record is great. This is a reissue. Just unbelievable. Such a great band that they all need to be mentioned. Mick Jones, Joe Strummer, Paul Simonon, who I actually spoke to once when I was working at a law firm in New York City. I believe it was Paul, and Topper Heaton, if that's pronounced right. You will not find a better rock and roll record than The Clash's London Calling, and one of the most iconic album covers ever as well. But this was a huge influence on those bands. Next, flipping genres, would be the Graham Parsons record Grievous Angel. This is also a reissue. I have an original copy, but this reissue, this originally came out in 1974. I had never noticed that it says on the back with Emmylou Harris. That's great. This is a perfect folk country record. Just brilliant songwriting by Graham and working with his partner Emmylou Harris. This is a must-have, an absolute must-have. Graham died young in Joshua Tree many years ago, maybe 10 years ago. I stayed at the inn where Graham passed away that may seem a little bit morbid, but it was actually pretty celebratory. It's a really cute place, and we had a lot of fun. And I wish Graham was still around. One of the greatest. Next, getting into sort of the more raw punk scene would be the Minutemen. I referenced Double Nickels on a Dime, which is one of my favorite records. This is another record also put on SST, which I referenced earlier in a earlier video. Came out in 1984. D. Boon, Mike Watt, and George Hurley. They're probably my favorite punk band. Not probably, they're definitely my favorite punk band. Huge influence on Uncle Tupelo. They actually wrote a song about D. Boon called D. Boon. So just a phenomenal band. And I'd have to include, there wasn't a ton of power pop in the alt-country scene, but all these bands would reference Big Star. This is their first record, which I just got the reissue yesterday in the mail from Kraft, which I'm excited about. I listened to it last night. It sounds gorgeous. This Big Star put out 3 records. They're all perfect, just like Nick Drake put out 3 records. They're all perfect. This is their debut, they called #1 record. That is pretty cool. As we all know, everyone knows the story of, well, not everyone, most know the story of Big Star. They did not go on to stardom, but in later years, 80s, 90s, 2000s, they have certainly become much more well-known across record collectors and just sort of folks who are interested in the history of music and rock and roll. One of the greatest, Alex Chilton from the Box Tops, Chris Bell, Jody Stevens, and Andy Hummel. I think I may have mentioned I was set to see the version of Big Star. I believe that included the 2 guys from the Posies at South by Southwest, and Alex Chilton died, I believe it was 2 days before the performance, so I never got to see them. And they did a tribute show that night with Evan Dando and Mike Mills from REM, and I couldn't get in because it was so packed. But this is a wonderful record, a must-have. Next, we got 3 more records that influence. Let's kind of jam through these. Townes Van Zandt, similar to Graham Parsons, a songwriter who was a huge influence on these artists. This is Delta Mama Blues, which my buddy Brian, who I've referenced before, turned me on to this record. He turned me on to Townes altogether. I have about 10 Townes records now. This is a great one. Steve Earle has the famous quote that he would stand on Bob Dylan's kitchen table in coffee boots and proclaim that Townes Van Zandt is the greatest songwriter of all time. And I believe Bob Dylan, I think it was many years later, heard the quote and responded, "I'd never let Steve Earle in my kitchen." It's a pretty good rebuttal. Townes Van Zandt, check him out, check out everything. Next, huge influence on these bands, The Replacements. This is Tim. I talked about Let It Be in my top 10 of the 80s. Tim is right alongside Let It Be with me in terms of the best Replacements records. I'll always remember I met one of my best friends my whole life, my buddy Scott. We were at me and my girlfriend at the time, and my buddy Dave, we were at a bar in Midtown Manhattan. I believe it was before we were seeing Whiskey Town and Fastball. I believe that was the double bill. And this guy came up to me. I had put a Replacement song on the jukebox. He came up to me and asked me what the song was. I said it was Here Comes a Regular by The Replacements. We started chatting, and I've been friends with him ever since. Just talked to him last weekend. That's what music can do. The Replacements, Tim. And finally, I'd have to mention the Ramones. Many would argue the greatest punk band ever. Is this an original? Yeah, 1976, Sire Records. Blitzkrieg Pop. I Want to Be Your Boyfriend. This is just a sensational record. The Ramones, Can't Go Wrong. Rocket to Russia, I believe, is the other great record of theirs. I'm not gonna lie, as you can see, I'm trying to grab some information on the fly. I've never listened to the Ramones all that much, and I should. And as a matter of fact, when I drive go on my drive today to have a lunch meeting, I'm gonna listen to this record. Now let's get into the actual bands in the scene. Of course, Uncle Tupelo. In my view, they started it. A lot of folks will say bands like Jason and the Scorchers, the Silos, I think may have predated. They did predate Uncle Tupelo. Other bands in the 80s that I'm not thinking of right now, but I think that Uncle Tupelo is largely responsible for a lot of the records that I fell in love with during this period. Uncle Tupelo was around from 1987 to 1994. They splintered off into Wilco and Sunvolt, and then just suddenly there was just this deluge of other bands that were putting out amazing records with similar sounds, and that's what I'll get into right now. But this is their debut. Uncle Tupelo, No Depression, came out in 1990, named after the Carter family song, and then as I mentioned earlier, the magazine called No Depression, so pretty influential. These guys were the first version of this band, Jay Farrar, Jeff Tweedy, and Mike Hydorn. Just sensational stuff. So I just mentioned Sunvolt was one of the bands that came out of Uncle Tupelo, or was sort of where one of the lead singer-songwriters landed. This is Jay Farrar's band. This is his second record, Straightaways. Beautiful, beautiful record. His first three with the Boquist brothers, Mike Hydorn on drums, the original Uncle Tupelo drummer, and Eric Haywood, I believe, was on most of these records on steel guitar, are just perfect. Trace is the first, Straightaways is the second, and Wide Swing Tremolo is the third. Great, great band, still around. Just saw them recently. And then, of course, the other band that came out, we can go through this quickly, Wilco. This is their sophomore release, Being There, named allegedly after the Peter Sellers movie, which there's, see if we can get this. That's the Being There original poster from the movie. Pretty hardcore fan of just being there. I love the images on the back of this record. You see the late Jay Bennett, John Sturrett, Max Johnson, Ken Coomer, and Jeff on right over here. A truly great record, and really changed the trajectory of where Wilco was headed. But now let's get into the other bands. Now this is a band that arguably was there at the beginning as well, because their debut, I believe, came out in 1989 from Minneapolis. And this is their, in my view, another band that's still together. They've gone through a bunch of different lineups, but they are still touring. They're playing San Francisco, and I will be seeing them not too long from now. I think they're playing San Francisco. And that's the Jayhawks. One of my favorite album covers, too. The Jayhawks' Hollywood Town Hall came out in 1992. Perfect record, top to bottom. Waiting for the Sun in Blue were the only sort of mainstream, they were never hits, but reached a wider audience. But every song on this record, there's only 10 tracks, and it is just a perfect album. Produced by George Drakoulias, Mark Olson, Gary Loris, Mark Perlman, and the drummer was Ken Callahan. He was an early drummer prior to Tim O'Regan. Joe Henry loaned them some guitars and black coffee, apparently. This is the back, Jayhawks Hollywood Town Hall, the perfect alt-country, Americana, whatever genre you want to call it, record. Next, from Oxford, Mississippi, Blue Mountain. It's the album Dog Days. It's a back shot. Carrie Hudson, who's still making solo records. They were one of the best live bands I've ever seen. Just the three of them. Truly phenomenal band. Laurie Sturratt, who was the brother of John Sturratt of Wilco. It's produced by my friend Eric Roscoe Amble, who's a good friend of mine from New York. I don't see him as much as I'd like, but I'll be going to New York in a couple weeks, and I hope maybe I can grab lunch with him. I'm just throwing that out there, Roscoe, if you're around and you're watching this. An incredible record. A bluesy singer-songwriter, political. It was just reissued 4 years ago on Roadrunner, and thank God for that, because this is one of those records that I've always wanted on vinyl, and now I have it, and it is just gorgeous. My friend Bob listens to this record almost daily. Just a tremendous band, Blue Mountain from Oxford, Mississippi. Next, from Tennessee, we got about 6 left. The V-Roys. This is the two well-known, or fairly well-known names out of this band were Scott Miller, who's still making beautiful records in Virginia. I believe he lives in Virginia. He has a farm. It was his parents' farm. So he makes records and also runs his farm. I recently saw a YouTube video where there was a local piece on him that was very cool, talking about sort of the family history and how he makes time to still write songs. And he never really tours much outside of Virginia, Tennessee, and sort of the surrounding states. I don't think he's ever come to the West Coast. I saw him in New York once. I saw the V-Roys at Wetlands open up for God Street Wine. They were incredible. They all take the stage in suits, or they did. They had a comeback or a reunion show on New Year's Eve not too long ago, 5-10 years ago, in Knoxville at a theater, and I almost went, and I really wish I had, because I love this band so much. This is a poppier version of the Alt.Country sound. Just a phenomenal record, produced by Steve Earle and Ray Kennedy. These guys were on E Squared, which was Steve Earle's label, and I can't recommend this album enough. It's called Just Add Ice. And then go check out Scott Miller, and Mick Harrison is the other gentleman. The two of them, I think, wrote most of the songs. Very much worth checking out, and check out all Scott Miller's records. Next, some would argue the best album out of the alt-country period. Lucinda Williams' Car Wheels on a Gravel Road. There's a huge story on this, which I hope is made into a documentary or something one day. It took her, I don't even know what it was, 7 or 8 years to make this record. She had numerous producers, I think numerous people in the studio. She was a perfectionist. I think she still is. She has a new record coming out. I just saw on Pitchfork yesterday. I think it's a political record, so that should be one worth checking out. This is a perfect, I know I keep saying that, but I pulled out the best of the best. This is absolutely perfect. One of the best singer-songwriter records ever released. I saw Lucinda many times back in the day. I saw her at sessions at West 54th Street, which was unreal. But if you look at the track listings, there is not a dud on this, not even close. So Lucinda Williams, Car Wheels on a Gravel Road. If you don't know this record, put it on today or sometime soon. Next, I mentioned them earlier, their first record, Marat, band from Philly. This is their second record, Kids in Philly. They put out, Marat probably have 7 or 8 albums now. The first 2 are sensational, perfect. Kids in Philly came out, I think it was 2000. And after Let's Cut the Crap, which came out in 1998, this is, some Far Away You to open it with the banjo, just incredibly good. I loved this band so much, saw them so many times live. As I mentioned, I considered them friends. I miss this period. It was an incredible period to be around great rock and roll. And as I mentioned in a previous video, one of the best live bands I've ever seen. Just played with an urgency and sort of a fire that you rarely see. It was like the E Street Band in their prime. So Marat, Kids in Philly. The next, I have to mention this band, despite not having their best few records on vinyl, because they were one of the best bands of the period. Their best records are only available on CD, and I wanted to keep this to vinyl. So the one record that I do have of theirs, which I haven't even opened yet, is Old Mad Joy by the Gourds. Seen these guys probably 20 times in my life. My favorite records of theirs are Stadium Blitzer and Dem's Good Beeble. That's Beeble. But they have Ghosts of Hallelujah is incredible. This is one of their later records. I believe this was recorded at Levon Helm's studio up in Woodstock. I think this is the one. Jimmy Smith and Kevin Russell are the two lead singer-songwriters from the Gourds, and what a combination. My friends and I used to say they were like Richards and Jagger, just all out, left nothing behind. Just, man, I saw these guys in San Francisco. I saw them in Austin so many times. I saw them in New York many times. I miss these guys. Kevin Russell's now touring under the name Shiny Ribs, and I think he's doing quite well. And Jimmy Smith, I believe, lives in Montana right now and sort of plays around locally. But they were, I believe they were Austin-based. Max Johnston, formerly of Uncle Tupelo and Wilco, joined the Gourds. These guys, check out their whole catalog. Start from the beginning, and you will likely find some incredible music. Richard Buckner, maybe the best pure singer-songwriter from the period. I consider him sort of the Townes Van Zandt of the 1990s. This is his debut, Bloomed, which Merge reissued in 2014. A beautiful record. My favorite of his is Devotion and Doubt, which came out after this and is not available on vinyl, and I'm hoping to change that someday. I don't know how, but because I believe it was on a major, it was on MCA, I'm pretty sure. Richard Buckner, Bloomed. Check out his whole catalog. Still makes records. Merge puts out everything that he releases. Comes out on Merge, which is, as we all know, a fantastic label. Maybe the band that was the most joyful out of this scene, the Old 97s. Let's get the title in there. Too Far to Care. This is their best. A power pop country masterpiece. Was reissued in 2012 on Elektra. Originally came out in 1997. Opens up with Time Bomb. Just play that and it'll make your day. Broadway, an incredible song. Just like California Nightclub, Big Brown Eyes. This is a ridiculously great record. Reissued by Omnivore, which they put out. They reissue a lot of the records a lot of my favorite reissues come out on Omnivore. Rhett Miller and Murray Hammond, the two main guys, the two lead sort of vocalists in this band. I've seen them probably 30 times. Here's the back of the album. Old 97's Too Far to Care. Start here and then go backwards and forwards throughout it all. Golden Smog. So this was the one supergroup that came out of this period. You can see who these folks are. That's Craig Johnston from Run Westy Run, a Minneapolis band. Jeff Tweedy comes up again, from Wilco and Uncle Tupelo. I can't see whose face that is. I think it's Noah Levy from the Honey Dogs, another Minneapolis band. There's Mark Perlman from the Jayhawks, Dan Murphy from Soul Asylum, and Gary Loris from the Jayhawks. There were different versions of this band. This was a really fun band. They took on fake names, and they put out 1, 2, 3.5 maybe records. This is the best one, Down by the Old Mainstream. It was reissued not long ago. I would look on YouTube for a video of Golden Smog performing the song V. You can see Jeff Tweedy is like in the background. I believe it's on Conan O'Brien. One of the best shows I saw in New York was Golden Smog. They played at Irving Plaza. They, in the encore, played I Got You by Split Enz, and the place just exploded. I really hope at some point these guys get back together. They're all doing their own things now. Obviously, Wilco and the Jayhawks have been very successful. Soul Asylum's still making records. Craig Johnston recently put out a record that I really liked. I don't know what Noah Levy's doing with the Honey Dogs. I don't know if they're still playing shows in and around Minneapolis, but check it out. Golden Smog down by the Old Mainstream, and then listen to Weird Tales, their follow-up. Both great. Two more. Can't mention this period without mentioning Steve Earle. This is I Feel All Right. Came out in 1996, reissued in 2014. Steve Earle obviously has a lot of history with Steve Earle. Sort of shot to the top of the charts with Guitar Town in the 80s, then served some time in prison, and upon release, I think, put out the best music of his career. I Feel All Right being one of those albums. Train a Comin' was another, and the other is escaping me right now. But I Feel All Right, this is really his I'm Free record. And Lucinda Williams plays on this record on the beautiful track You're Still Standing There. Opens with I Feel All Right, which is just a guitar charging masterpiece. This period, mid-90s to 2000s, Steve Earle, you cannot go wrong. Just a wonderful, wonderful record, and I recommend you check it out. Steve Earle, I Feel All Right. Finally, probably my, outside of Uncle Tupelo, who I sort of point to as the band that started it all for me, and that sort of revitalization of music in my life. There's one band that is so dear to me for reasons that I will probably save for another video, because it was instrumental in helping me through a tough period, is the best way I'll put it. But I think it's worth sharing that story at some point. I've shared it with friends. The band is Denton Texas's Slobberbone. This is sort of a greatest hits that was put out in 2016 by New West Records. Will Johnson from Centromatic and just Will Johnson solo records did the artwork for this. It's a double LP. This is their best. It's called B's and C's, the best of Slobberbone. I think we can open this up. Some beautiful shots in here, some taken by friends of mine. The the story about the band is written by Patterson Hood from the Drive-By Truckers, who just released a new record last Friday. I think it was last Friday, The Unraveling. I spent a lot of time with these guys. I have some incredible stories. Brent Best, who I've mentioned, who I think I've mentioned, I became friends with over time. And now that I think about it, let's share one quick anecdote. After Slobberbone, Brent Best put out a solo record. It's called Your Dog Champ. That's the artwork. I took that picture. I was not intending to show this, but I just thought of Slobberbone, and that dog is my dog. That guy. B. Bennett. He doesn't realize that he's immortal, but he is on the cover of Brent Best's solo record. I'll get into the story of how that happened another time, but I really can't recommend Slobberbone enough. They're still playing shows in Texas, and I think touring or opening for a variety of bands. They played with Cheap Trick a bunch of times. Brent Best is everything I would want a musician to be as a person. I don't know, that sounds a little bit much, but he is incredibly kind. He loves music the way that his fans love music. He's gracious. He's so humble, and he shows so much gratitude about people who buy his records and see his shows. And Slobberbone were a band that should have had a much bigger audience, but Brent always was so appreciative of everything. I consider him a friend. I know the other guys in the band as well. I hope I get to see them again. Might be going down to Austin for South by Southwest this year, and maybe Maybe they'll be playing a show, but check out Slobberbone. If the best of is great, their best record, non-best of best record, I would say, is Everything You Thought Was Right Was Wrong Today, which came out in 2000. Again, I could do a whole series of videos on Brent, Best, and Slobberbone, but that's it for today. Hopefully I've introduced you to some records. I tried to point out the best of the best. There's still so much more, so many bands that did not put out albums on vinyl that I will cover maybe in another video. Bands like the Backsliders. I should have mentioned Six String Drag, Kenny Roby's fantastic record or band out of, I believe they're out of Chapel Hill. The Backsliders is Chip Robinson's band. Tremendous band. Just listen to the song Abe Lincoln. But there's so much more, and we'll get into it another time. But that is my view on alt-country, mostly in the 1990s. And again, I hope you find some music that you will check out. Take care.